button, and we are recording the webinar. So what we're talking about today is the trends that we can apply to our business in order to get ahead. What does that mean? We're going to talk about in principle. The first thing is I'm just going to chat you through very quickly what we've got in our trend database, which you have full access to through the marketing plan blueprint. So just a little chat, and we're constantly updating this, so this is a lifetime resource that we're always updating. So there's going to be some new areas that we're developing, and I've just thrown those in to get you excited about those. Then we're going to take you through a process that you can use to work out how to apply that to your thing, and those 4 stages are the next few bits. So the know, focus, apply. I've called it next steps, but it's also actually the go off and do it. So let's get right into it. So basically, when we talk about our trends, we've kind of created a database of these trends based on an awful lot of thinking and talking, and also on the material that's coming through our membership site of Insights and Trends. And we've grouped them into broadly 7 themes. And I think they're fairly clear. Some of them are fairly obvious, so economic, you know, what's going on in the world economy, social trends, may cover a very, very broad range of things, and we'll talk about that. Technology, things that are going on in the marketing world, things that are going on in our world, and then something that we call combined and counter trends, because trends very seldom walk alone. They're actually friendly to one another, so that we do get a sense of all of those things happening. And then finally, there's a whole bunch of trends that every now and again don't really kind of fit into there. So we do have what we in the research trade know as a dump code, which is other. Overall, we've got around 50 different trends that we talk about. Sometimes we'll talk about them as a group, and I'll talk you through those as examples. So sometimes you might be looking at going, where's the 50? But other times we will break those down and kind of go into them in a little bit more depth. So let's have a look very, very briefly before we go too much further at what those 50 plus trend areas are. There's so many I couldn't fit them all on one page, so I'm going to break them down into sort of smaller buckets. So our economic bucket, so uncertainty. It's curious, when we first started talking about inequality about 2 to 3 years ago, it's really only us and a few of the big banks like Credit Suisse who were talking about this. Now inequality is kind of moving from being a big looming macro trend to a very in the now. Looking at which of the markets that are going to be coming and growing, you know, so we've seen markets like the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, and China. They were the hottest topic. The resources boom slowed down, they cooled, they're starting to kick back off again. And we also look at the idea of cycles versus trends, because trends are specific themes, whereas cycles, somebody said for me, for example, you know, is the mining boom, is that an economic cycle? Well, it is an economic cycle if you're Australia. It's a trend if you're Norway, because what Norway did when they were at the top of the boom was they put all that money in a big piggy bank called a sovereign wealth fund. We spent ours on TVs. Norway's spending theirs on giving their children a future. Sorry, political point out of the way now. Generational change, when we turn to social, this is enormous. So all of our generational cohorts, we've written some white papers on this, which you can find on the website. We're looking at the fact that the world's population overall is aging. We're looking at the fact that countries, many of our most important markets domestically, Australia, but some of our key inbound markets like Europe, the US, Canada, increasing ethnic diversity. We're seeing changes in who's got money and who's got power with women, with families. We've seen the idea of what it means to be a business changing. We've seen ideas around health changing, ideas around work changing. We've seen the growth of the expectation economy, the attention economy, and I've just realized we do also need to add to that, we will be starting to talk more and more about the experience economy as well. So the 3 E's and their EEA, so a lot going on there. Technology. Again, we now know, when I saw a documentary on the ABC last week on some of these topics, we realized that, again, these are now close to being mainstream. They're no longer just at the tip of breaking trends. These are now trends that are, you know, very much there. the Internet of Things. So that's when your fridge can actually tell you that you need to use something up before it's about to run out, which hopefully will reduce a lot of things. And it might come to your watch, so you'll be wearing your Fitbit or your Apple Watch. The new wave of innovation, the new industrial revolution, AI and machine learning. So the fact that machines are increasingly doing things that we thought 100 years ago only humans would ever be able to do, like learn from mistakes, gather data, curate it, and start to be able to mimic us. So that's led to things like the growth of robots, even online bots. We've seen virtual reality and increasingly augmented reality, which are enormous opportunities, and we're going to be talking more about augmented reality. And the other one is, we saw a few years ago, we were talking about Mobilegeddon, which we'll talk about under marketing, but we're also seeing the growth and the growth and the growth of voice technology driving the way we do things. So we're seeing a lot of change in marketing as well. We're seeing the rise of consumer we no longer define by age. We're seeing the fact that, in a sense, the tourism industry way back to the 1970s has managed dynamic pricing, but we're seeing that move from something where you put a price in place for a season to where your pricing could actually not be there within 5 minutes. The growth of micro moments because of things like that change to a 5-minute change in pricing. Now again, Mobilegeddons should now be mainstream, but we're still finding people are not understanding that. Semantic search and intent marketing, which is the idea of basically fishing where the fish is. So if your consumer's looking for something, making sure that you're there. I still am slightly of the opinion that intent marketing is just a clever lens to look at through things that good marketers have always done, but those lenses can be incredibly powerful and incredibly useful. Some of our others, so our combined encounter trends. The sharing economy is not a technology trend in my view. It's when the technology enabled things that we needed to do. It's created its own information. We've seen the growth of both hyperteching with destinations where your room talks to you, to places where you hand your phone in at reception and don't talk to anyone. Over the last year, as algorithms have got smarter and have started to hyper-personalize things, we've seen a yearning to go back to a time when we just discovered things by accident. Remember those days on the internet? We've seen a world where what's passing is there, and sadly some of that's for very sad reasons. So we're seeing ephemerality in tourism grow around places that people think may not be there in 50 years, like Antarctic and Arctic tourism. Visits to the Great Barrier Reef might fit into that. We've seen the debate about what's going on, that's the public space and the private space. We're seeing a lot of those things changing. And we've seen we are entering the era of post-truth, and that's a really important trend that has implications for your marketing and your marketing plans. Tourism, so much going on in our world. Multi-generational, changes in the way VFR works, accessible travel growing as a thing, solo travel, changes in the luxury market, changes in how we think of the customer experience, changes in some key sectors like MICE, cruising, theme parks, air travel. We talked about the experience economy. Here we see it in action, things like dark tourism, culture and heritage, the rise of local, and the eternal fascination. Again, this is not a new trend, it's a new way of looking at an eternal human truth. Our love of maps. And finally, unless you've been under a rock for the last kind of week, you will know that over-tourism is now very much in the headlines. So we can actually start to see a lot of those things come through and be part of our world. And finally, the other one is what's going on with climate change. So this, again, sadly, it's not a trend, but we didn't quite know where else to put it. But we think this is something that we all need to be thinking about and planning for in what we're doing. Because increasingly we know that climate change is not what's going to happen in 20 years' time, it's going to be what happens next week. Now, at this point, looking at that 50-odd list, you're probably feeling a bit like this poor lady. So she's probably feeling a bit stressed out, and you probably are too. So we're here to say to you, don't worry. Take a deep breath. You do not have to use or apply all of these trends to your business. The whole purpose of today is about looking at how to select the trends that you're going to be focusing on, and which are the ones that are most relevant to your needs. So as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy would have it, don't panic. You don't have to use all of them. This is about a process. What we're trying to do is it's about thinking of this as your trends assistant as you do your planning for the year ahead, and incidentally for all the other years ahead as we update the trends platform. So what we've developed is a 4-step process that you can use to apply those 50-odd trends that you have in the marketing plan blueprint. And this is really part of the know phase of it. So we've said the first thing you need to do is to know what the trends are, and also you need to know your customer. You'll notice I've put some page references in that you can actually then go in and start to use those. Then what we've done is say, okay, this is the process where you start to work out which goes into the I need to do something of this bucket and which goes into other buckets. My recommendation is the not now, fairly soon, right now is probably the buckets. So what we've done is we've created 10 for you to have a look at and said, look, if you haven't done these, you should do this. Then we're going to apply 3 tests to the trends that is unique to your organization or your business, and say, apply these to work out which goes into that do now, which bucket you're going to put those in. Then we're going to show you how to apply those using a trends canvas, and then complete this for all of your major trends is what you do. And then the final stage is to go away and start implementing that. That's the do phase. So let's spend a little more time thinking about the know phase. So in a sense, the overview I've just done of the trends is very much part of that, knowing what the trends are. We would recommend that you do go away and read it. We wouldn't say you have to do it in one big sitting. You know, if you want to do a Game of Thrones style binge, we'd love that. Please let us know so we can talk about it. But otherwise, feel free to do it in your own good time. And let's have a look at who they are. So that's the first thing, is you've got all the trends in your head. Then thinking back to the persona session that Bron did as our previous web coaching call webinar, using some of that. So think about who is your current customer. So for example, if you're looking at some of those trends, you need to think, is the customer who's my customer now going to be my customer in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years? And the Tourism Marketing Rockstar Day on the 14th of September, we'll be talking about 50-year and 100-year planning. So if you are there, if it's still the same customer base, what are you trying to do? If you're looking at it going, well, that market's about to disappear, or that market is changing, do you need to change things? So looking at new markets, phasing out the old. One thing I would say though is, please don't assume just because you're still thinking this is my sector doesn't mean they're not changing. We're seeing enormous change within some of our generational cohorts. We're seeing the baby boomers refusing to grow old gracefully, but on the other hand, realizing that to grow old disgracefully needs some subtle adjustments. Similarly, as if your target is the millennial generation, they're all about to become parents, or many of them are about to become parents. So what's that going to mean if you're targeting that? So, you know, for example, we're still seeing sectors like single seniors out there, but the environment around them changes as well. So, you know, if you were targeting the single senior market now, you've got a lot more competition than you had 2 years ago, particularly in the international space. You know, single seniors are about to go off and climb Mount Everest with an adventure trekking company. What are you doing to compete against that? Or if that's you, what are you looking at what other people are doing? Okay, so let's try and start focusing in on some of those trends a little bit more. Now, what we say to everyone is, have a look at these ones first, and if you haven't got that list, and if you haven't done something with these, start with these. Do your trends canvas around these. So, you know, a year ago we were talking about planning for mobile. We talked about the world of Mobilegeddon, where there's been a huge shift from our desktops to our mobiles. Now we're actually at the point where in many markets the majority of search inquiries are going to be done on a mobile as opposed to on a desktop. And that's got enormous consequences for things. So that's there, but it's now ramped to the next level. So 2 years ago, Google was saying plan for mobile. Now you need to be planning for voice search. Bron is virtually a 99%er on voice search. I am anywhere where I can do it quietly. So you need to be thinking about what you're doing and how you're creating assets and planning for voice. And we do have some tools and tips to help you with that. And we will increasingly be introducing them into the marketing plan blueprint. New SEO, the whole concept of semantic search. Again, this is something that's been around pretty much since Google did a major change around 2 years ago, where we moved into a world where we're no longer looking at things like search terms in keywords and keyword stuffing and link stuffing. Google is using artificial intelligence and the outer edges of geekdom to try and work out what we want and serve it up to us. But our observation, because as well as observing the trends, we're also observing the trends within our own industry, is that most people haven't realized that it's not a case you get yourself set up for semantic search and you dust your hands off and say job done. You now need to move from being hunter-gatherers in the semantic search space into being farmers. So you need to be tending your crop of content and thinking about that really hard. And that means content marketing, the idea of using earned assets and owned assets like your website, your social media pages, your PR, to develop and tell compelling stories and using imagery to do that. So that remains something that's an ongoing and constant focus. Intent marketing, so when your customer is speaking into your phone and saying, you know, where is the best place to go bushwalking this weekend, that you have content there ready to go and curated for her. Particularly also in the area of local marketing, that we're pretty often, because we're on mobile, we're doing it in destination. On top of that, we know that, for example, visiting friends and relatives, hosts are a huge part of the research process in that decision. So think local is something you need to be thinking about. Accessible tourism. With an aging population, and rising levels of illnesses like diabetes, more and more and more people are not just going to find it easy to do the things they love. The other thing we know about this market, besides it's growing, is it actually has a great multiplier effect. So while not every traveller with a disability is always the highest earning person, they typically traveling with other people, so the multiplier effect is there. In Europe, consumers with a disability are typically spending 16% more on a trip per person than other people. And what we've seen is massive compound annual growth rates over a 10-year period in that market. This is only really starting to just take off in Australia, and the National Disability Insurance Scheme is going to drive some of that. Seniors, an enormous market, really almost fully now entering the upper end of the baby cohort, really entering that area. We're seeing the growth and growth and growth of multi-generational. So how are you planning experiences for all of your, you know, for a group that might include gran who likes to go shopping, kids who want to run around and have adventure, and mum and dad who just want a break and maybe are hoping the grandparents might take the kids away. So are you curating things that grandparents and kids can do together? Are you creating opportunities for couples to be able to say, mum, can you take the kids for a day? Solo travel. The baby boomer cohort, again, is leading this, but we're seeing it across all generations. We're getting married late. Many of us are not getting married. Many of us who are within relationships also are increasingly happy to go and do our own thing if our partner wants to do it. So it's no longer the days when we sit there and put up with that. So what are you doing for that? And how are you dealing with a world where we all look a lot more different? Indian migrants are now Australia's, if like me you're addicted to the census, go and have a look at the pivot tables. They are awesome. Sorry, that's my real geek side coming through. Have a look at how our population is. So what are the stories, if you're targeting the domestic market, what are the stories are you telling people that didn't grow up, you know, coming to visit your attraction or your destination? You know, what are you doing for people who don't have in their head the idea that, you know, going bushwalking or, you know, going to the Gold Coast and shopping at Pacific Fair is something you did, the Great Australian Road Trip? What are you doing for that world? What are you doing for a world where sometimes your family might be 3 of you and sometimes it might be 8? In the week of the announcements about the marriage equality votes, what are we doing for one of our fastest growing and most affluent audiences, the pink dollar? So we have the purple dollar in accessibility, but we have the pink dollar. What are we doing to think about the fact that our population is changing, and how are we planning for that? So if you're already sitting there going, okay, I've got that. Sorry, the next 5 minutes are going to be a little bit confronting for you, but stick with me. So if you haven't found 10 things you need to do there, the next stage that we want you to go through is to think about all of those trends and run 3 tests against them. I'm going to take you through each of those tests in turn. Relevance, emotion, and now uniqueness is probably a bit of a stretch, but there's more than one way to be unique. It doesn't have to be a totally different stand apart thing. It can just be about the way that you put your twist on it. But finding in the last couple of years, we've increasingly been talking about the area of blue ocean strategy. So don't be part of the shark feeding frenzy. Go out and find your own piece of blue ocean. And that's what uniqueness can do. So if you apply those 3 tests, it will help you work out that these are the trends that you're going to put in there. So make them the trends work for you. So we've talked a little bit about the relevance idea, and that's coming through from those, what are the hot topics? You need to be looking at them, looking at your business, looking at your customer and going, okay, what does that mean? So that's your relevance test. Applying the emotion test. Which of the trends excite you? Which are the ones when you read about them going, my God, this sounds fantastic? Which trends could you actually really visualize yourself going, God, if I could find a way to make this work for me, this would be amazing. So, you know, for example, virtual reality and drones now increasingly becoming common. I had 3 papers at the Travel and Tourism Research Association chapter conference in Dubai last December talking about applying these, and that was in places as diverse as Thailand, as Finland. So is this something that you're looking at? And we'll use this as an example. So what are the trends that really get you excited? Because one of the things we know is this is not an easy process. So that excitement is going to carry you through applying these to your business. It will get you energized. It will get your teams working on this. So that excitement is there. Bronze heard me say this so many times, she's probably yawning at this point, but emotion is the most monetizable asset on that we have in our thing. Whatever else changes, that's not going to change until the robots take over completely, and by then we'll have trained them to have emotions, so it will still imply then. The second part of the emotion trend, which are the trends that scare the out of you? So there are some trends you'll go, God, I want to be part of that. But if there are trends you're sitting there going, OMG, what am I going to do? Economic uncertainty, artificial intelligence, robots taking over my job. How do I need to do that? So that's where you're going, is this something I need to find out more about? Because that fear helps you focus if you do it properly, if you channel it well and plan around it. Is it something we need to be thinking about? When we're planning our marketing, do we have it in our resilience plan? So does our marketing plan take account of what would happen if there's a 5% drop in our current visitor base? You know, what happens with North Korea at the moment? If North Korea invades South Korea and South Koreans are a big part of your market, where are you going to pick up people for that? What are you going to do if there's a virus? So, for example, Mexico, when they had an outbreak of swine flu, suddenly the the US market to Mexico fell like a stone. And they had no plan for that, but they went out and looked at the domestic market, which they'd never previously really tried to grow because they thought it was unchangeable. When they had to fill things, they opened things up and they now have a domestic marketing strategy. It's important to prepare for the negative as well as the positive. If you can predict, you can't act. You know what you can do, and you know what your wriggle room is. Resilience is, I'm a great believer in resilience. We often talk about resilience as solely response to crisis, but resilient businesses are around and they always have time to grow. So this is your second part of the emotion test. That can get things into your bucket. And then applying the uniqueness test. What you need to be doing is going, okay, which are the trends where I can, with a little bit of pulling apart, I can go away and see that this is something I can use to set myself apart from my competitors. So of course that means you need to know what your competitors are up to, you need to know what your customers are interested in. And one of these is the whole area of virtual reality. I mean, I think these prices are already out of date. We put these in around 6 months ago and the price of most of these things is already dropped. So, you know, you can actually look at buying a virtual reality camera and being able to create amazing content for your website, being able to take things that you might take to, so, you know, when Tourism Australia launched its virtual reality around the coastal and aquatic experiences, they were on hand to, you know, give people a taste of that. But you could actually, with a $15 pair of Google glasses, you could the Google virtual reality cheap glasses, you could get that experience sitting at your desk or on your mobile phone at home. So have a think about what are the trends where you really see that this is an opportunity to do things a little bit differently from other people to help you stand apart. So now that you've looked at that idea of what's relevant to me, what are the things I haven't done, all of those, now you're ready to compile your own top 10 list. So the next thing, that focus that you're starting to do at that point, is you take all of those trends that you've worked through and you put your own top 10 in here. As I said, nice and easy if you looked at that initial top 10 and thought, we still need to do work here. That would be, you know, however many places of that you think is an issue for you. But basically now you're ready to take this top 10 and use our trends canvas to apply it to your business. What you need to do is repeat the canvas for each trend that you put in here. If it's 9 or it's 11 or it's 12, don't panic. The 10 is just an easy way of doing it. It could be that you even just start with 4 or 5, because again, you can generate momentum. So one thing we always like to talk about is, you know, the 2 to 3 things you need to do quickly and the 2 to 3 you need to do in the slightly longer term. So going away and doing this, and this is a great exercise to do as part of your planning sessions. So this is the trends canvas. We saw that Trend Watching had one, and we thought it was good, but we actually thought that there were some improvements we could make that were specific to our industry. So we took away with this, you need to align what you're doing here with what you're doing with your brand. So the first thing you need to do at the top is to populate it, you know, write down, document what is the trend that we're talking about. Talk about the current and potential customers it needs to apply to, and try and understand that. Try and make sure you don't rule too many people out too early. So think broadly about this and then kind of highlight within that who are the people. Doing something about this, what are the needs that it fulfills? And this again very much aligns with your brand blueprint. So what are the things that, what are the practical logistical things that this trend offers? So, you know, what are the opportunities for marketing that this does? What emotional need does it do? So what it does, this trend offer us some sense of control over our life? Does it make our life richer? Does it make our life simpler? So, you know, selling the sizzle, not the sausage. What are the emotional benefits? Then we think it's always good to go away and say, who can we find out who's done a really great job of this? Because while we want to do our own unique things, and I'll talk about that in a moment, we also can learn from the way other people have done it, including what they found hard. And again, what I'd say on that is look within your competitor set, but look beyond it. You know, Bron and I, there's probably a stable of brands that we're always looking at and saying, these are people who know how to apply this well to what they're doing. Even if they're not tourism businesses, even if they exist in the broader framework. For example, brands like Heineken in the communication space are consistently innovative brands who do great work. So I'm not ashamed to learn from a beer manufacturer, particularly because anything a beer manufacturer is doing that no one else is doing well in our sector is something that I can do. So, you know, think about it as incremental innovation in your business. And then So you've got all of those populated, and then you get to the point where it's how do we apply it to us? What is the way that we can do it? What can we do now? What's short term, what's now and easy? So that's that split that I said. So what's a quick win that we could do in this? What are some of the things that are longer term that we need to be building, not just into our marketing plans, but into our infrastructure planning, into our resource planning, into our strategy plan, or that we need to go and do a little bit more work on? Again, if you're sitting there going, oh my God, how are we going to do this? As they say on the cookery shows, here's one we prepared earlier. So we talked about accessible travel. And, you know, this is one where we pulled it together, and it was quite interesting. We produced this one for the Tourism Marketing Rockstar session last year, and a couple of people in the audience got really excited because they virtually said they'd been to a one-day conference the week before, or about a month before, and this almost exactly got to what they needed to do. So, you know, we looked at it and said, this is the trend. We looked at who it's applying to. You know, we looked at all sorts of different ways. I look at this. Having just completed a big project in this area, I'm probably going to update the language. We no longer talk about impairment. We talk about disability in terms of barriers. But everything else in there still really, really stacks up. So, you know, thinking about traveling companions. What are you going to do for the grandkids who are on a multi-generational trip when granddad's not very mobile? What needs does it fill? So, you know, what are some of the functional things that we can do? So are we offering adequate disabled parking spaces? Have we got wheelchair accessible parkways? But what's the emotional needs that we're developing? So, you know, empowering people, self-respect, freedom, giving them some space, might be about respite. So these were really very top of mind ones. And, you know, again, doing this now, I would probably populate this a little bit more, but just to give you a feeling of that. So that tells you both what you need to do and how you need to do this. So being able to get around means that you start to think about it there. Who's applied it well? Bron found this fabulous example in Venice where the gondoliers all got together and funded creation of an accessible gondola. So you can be in a wheelchair or need to use a wheelchair to get about, but you can actually still go on a gondola ride. We've consistently seen the UK and indeed Europe more widely has done a great job of applying this. So going in, you know, good excuse for an investigation trip, I feel. You know, go and have a look at what they're doing, the way they're planning around it, what's their action plan, for example, is freely available on the website, so you can go away and have a look at that. There's lots of resources out there we find to help you do that. So what are some things that you could do right now to get some momentum on this? So, you know, something on your website that says 10 exciting activities anyone can do. Having a tab on accessible tourism or accessible experiences on the top level of your website is an absolutely super easy win, providing you've got the right content management platform for your website, of course. So that's something that you can do right now. Have a look at your image library. We've partnered on a few things with Bill Forrester, who runs Travelability and Photability, and use wherever we can his images, which are images of don't use people who do not have a disability and put them in a wheelchair and think that works. People with a disability can see that coming a blimmin' mile away. So here's an example you can think about images. What's your customer service and training like to deal with people who have a disability? How are you managing it? One great story I heard was from someone who went to a destination that she was told was fully accessible, and it's true, they had a ramp to get wheelchairs to do part of the tour. And the tour guide would say, okay, so you go down the ramp, we'll go down the stairs and we'll meet you at the bottom. Can you imagine how offensive that was to her? As opposed to, we'll all go down the ramp because we have a guest who needs to use the ramp with us today. Didn't add any time to the tour, just thinking. Longer term, so looking at things like your physical environment, entrance ramps, guest rooms, bathrooms, height of tables, height of chairs, access parts. Can you put on events? Can you develop new products that sit in this space? So this is just one example of how you can apply this trend. and how you can apply the trends canvas. That one we created, Bron, I think we spent about half an hour brainstorming that one, and we got to something that got people to the point where they thought 80% of that was done. Obviously, we do this for a living, so it's a little bit easier for us, but that's there. So bringing it now to our do and our next steps. Now you've got your trends sorted, you're ready to do something. Now, some of our future calls will talk about how to apply some of these into your SWOT analysis, and we'll also be talking about how you can put some of these into your tactical action plans. So all of those are coming up. I've realized, Bron, I should have brought up the diary for the rest of the coaching call sessions, but I promise I will do that next time. While I've got this on the screen, we've covered pretty much everything off that we need to do. Bron, might just ask you to see if you've got any questions, or if anyone, I can now unmute everyone. I will unmute people, and if you want to ask or share thoughts. Bron, sorry, I think something's going on in the background. So any questions that anyone would like to have or ask, if you don't want to ask them publicly on the record, what I'll do is I'll now switch the recording off so that if you want to ask questions you can ask them frankly. So I'm ending the recording now.